I'm quite excited about this session. We've got an amazing breadth of speakers, and it will start with Susan Houston, who's the CEO for the New Zealand Planning Institute. Susan has worked in the private and public sector and brings her role as CEO of the New Zealand Planning Institute over 25 years of experience in economic development and organisational leadership in both Australia and New Zealand. Driven by a need to leave organisations and those they serve in a better state than how she found them, Susan is a self-confessed and unapologetic agent of change and innovation with a strong commitment to evidence-based decision-making. Susan's 9 years as CEO of not-for-profits in New Zealand has provided plenty of scope for innovation and achievement, as did her previous role as Director with Queensland Department of Employment, Economic Development and Innovation. Susan.
Thank you, Sonia. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. And thank you for the opportunity to share a New Zealand story with you today. The story is about a tale of two cities, and it was indeed the best of times and the worst of times. Some of you will recognise in these words the opening lines of the Charles Dickens classic, A Tale of Two Cities. In thinking about the state of cities in New Zealand, it's all too tempting, and for me, utterly irresistible, to echo the words penned by Dickens in 1859. He was describing the cities of Paris and London on the eve of massive political and social upheaval in Europe. Like revolutionary Europe, two of New Zealand's major cities are facing massive political and social upheaval. In the North Island, the city of Auckland struggles with massive governance change, whilst the largest city in the South Island, Christchurch, struggles with the impact of destructive and rolling earthquakes. And as we've learnt this morning, or been reminded this morning, both cities, all cities, but these in particular, are critical to the prosperity of New Zealand. This story then is about how those two cities are responding to the best of times and the worst of times, and what the legacy of those times might be for future generations of New Zealand Inc. Incorporated. Oh, it works, great. To give you an appreciation of the importance of Auckland and Christchurch to New Zealand Inc., let me take you on a very quick tour of Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. New Zealand lies about 1,600 kilometres from both Australia and Polynesia and covers a total of 268,000 square kilometres. So it's a little larger than the UK, but with just a small population of 4.4 million rather than the 62 million who inhabit the UK. Consists of a North and South Island, and let's not forget Stewart Island, as we cannot forget Tasmania in Australia. The South Island, often referred to as the mainland, is significantly larger than that of the North Island, and the major cities within those two islands are respectively Auckland in the north and Christchurch in the south. The majority of New Zealand's population live within city environs, and our nominal GDP per capita is approximately 43,000, and that's one of the lowest in the developed world. Our nominal GDP sits at around 133 billion, and just to give you some idea of scale, and many of you will know this already, the Australian GDP sits at around 1.23 trillion. New Zealand has a small economy then, and lies far from traditional markets for Western developed nations, i.e. Europe, US. And like Australia, we rely heavily on Asian and Pacific markets. Our major industries in terms of employment are manufacturing, healthcare, social assistance, construction, education and training, and tourism. And we're well endowed with different cultures and ethnicities, with 67% of New Zealanders hailing from European ethnicity, 15% identify as Maori, a similar amount as Pacific Islanders, and a fair slab of Chinese population there, so a very blessed nation that way. But like the rest of the world, we continue to struggle with the fallout of the GFC, experiencing high unemployment rates, especially amongst our youth. In some of those demographics, that youth demographic, unemployment is as high as 27%. That's talking about chaos this morning. That's potential for chaos. We've got a dip in consumer confidence, a tight property market, and growing income inequality. And that graph that you have before you shows the level of income inequality in New Zealand in comparison with our OECD counterparts. So if you look at the New Zealand line, you can see that there's a fairly long arrow, and that just demonstrates the growth in disparity in income. So to sum up, we're a small economy, relatively small and culturally diverse population, and we struggle for connection to the more traditional global markets at what continues to be a challenging time internationally. The future of prosperity of New Zealand Inc. is in large measure dependent on the future and prosperity of Auckland and Christchurch. So how are those two cities faring? Auckland, which is by far New Zealand's largest city with a population of 1.46 million, that's around a third of New Zealand's total pop, covers an area of 5,600 square kilometres and contributes a significant 35% to New Zealand's GDP. Again, it's culturally and ethnically diverse, and the median age for those living within Auckland is 33 years. So it's a relatively young, vibrant, and culturally diverse city. Like all cities in the Commonwealth, and we've been hearing about some of them this morning, it has its challenges, and then it has some unique ones. The challenge is typical to other cities. It's facing massive growth, with predictions that the population will increase between 700,000 and 1 million over the next 20 years. That growth will represent 60% of all population growth in New Zealand. That growth will also exacerbate the existing infrastructure problems that Aucklanders confront, such as roading, broadband, water and public transport, all the usual suspects. Other challenges confronting the city include a growing wealth disparity, as we've seen, and the implications that this disparity has for health, social and long-term economic and productivity in both hard and soft infrastructure. Foremost amongst the most immediate challenges confronting Auckland, other than the Rugby World Cup, should I mention it, is the massive transition in governance it is currently undergoing. In 1966, the population of Auckland was represented very well by 31 councils. That's a fair number. If there is over-governance, then it's there. In 1989, government reform reduced that number to a more reasonable 8 councils, and since 1989, Auckland has developed a plethora of regional and local planning documents in an attempt to align efforts across the region. And just to name a few, the Regional Growth Strategy, One Plan, a Transport Strategy, an Economic Development Strategy, a Waterfront Strategy, a Sustainability Framework, no less than 8 long-term council community plans, 7 district land use plans, and the list goes on. And yet the fragmentation of effort persisted throughout the region, whilst regional strategic plans gathered dust on the shelves, all too many cases unfunded and unaligned. In 2007, Cries for Change led New Zealand central government, we just have 2 tiers of government in New Zealand, not 3, to establish a Royal Commission of Inquiry into Auckland's governance. Sitting for 2 years, the commissioners recommended in 2009 the establishment of one council to represent and manage the Auckland region. Later it became known as the Auckland Council, and it's in part based on the Brisbane City Council model. The rationale for that decision: cost savings was certainly one of the justifications for the new super city. It was predicted that the wages bill for staff alone would go from 604 million to 513 million as a result of reducing staff numbers. Almost 7,000 public servants were without jobs following the amalgamation. Alignment of planning and resources and scale were also argued as justification for the governance intervention. For that reason, the new council was charged with the task of preparing and adopting a single spatial plan to guide the long-term growth and development of Auckland. On November the 1st, 2010, the existing 8 councils passed into history, and Auckland Council was born. It was born amidst controversy, optimism, and almost universally high expectations from this community. Let's just take a quick trip down south to Christchurch. Much smaller than Auckland, 376,000 population, and it's as different culturally from Auckland as Adelaide is to Sydney. Christchurch contributes just 14% to New Zealand's GDP. It's dominated by European New Zealanders, with 75.4% being of European background, and the median age for Christchurch is 36. Its dominant industries are tourism and ag. It's governed by one local authority, that's Christchurch City Council, and one regional council, Environment Canterbury. Like the rest of New Zealand, it's struggling to emerge from the recent GFC, and like Auckland, it has its own very local and unique challenges. Can I ask how many people here have been to Christchurch? My apologies in advance if what I'm going to show you is distressing. It certainly distresses me whenever I watch it. On 4th September 2010, the city made news around the world as it was rocked by rolling earthquakes, the largest being 7.1 on the Richter scale. Those quakes rolled on throughout the summer, day by day, until the 22nd of February this year, when the city was again devastated by a series of earthquakes, ranging from 5 to 6.3 on the Richter scale. Those buildings weakened by the earlier quakes couldn't stand, and under the pressure of the second wave of quakes, they came down. The map I'm about to show you will give you a sense of the strong and continuing seismic activity experienced in Christchurch since September 2010. There's a wee date down on the right-hand corner. Keep an eye on it for the explosion that happens on the 22nd of February. This is from September. And the dots that remain behind are each specific quake. It's not one quake, it's not even 10 or 100. So if you can imagine you're living in a city, you're already feeling not safe from the first one in September, and then you're confronting this every day. Speed it up. I don't think it will, but you'll get the idea. So it has indeed been the worst of times for what was one of New Zealand's most beautiful cities. I'm just about ready to come up to the 22nd. Bang. All over Christchurch. So what's been the impact of those continuing quakes on the ground? And this is what I'm apologising for. Take a look at Christchurch post 22nd of February. gives you an idea of the extent of the damage. So in the trail of the February quake, New Zealanders mourned 181 people who had been killed by the quakes. Still more were injured, over 10,000 homes were lost, a further 100,000 have been estimated as damaged to some extent or another. The natural disaster shut down the central city, with up to 50% of the buildings in what is known as the red zone needing to be demolished, and along with it, much of the city's heritage. Some areas of Christchurch will be abandoned entirely. The recovery and rebuild of the city is estimated to cost around $20 billion. That may or may not seem a large amount to people from Australia, but it is a huge amount for people in New Zealand, given the size of our economy. Reinsuring Christchurch buildings has proved difficult, with insurance costs now prohibitive. Indeed, the City Council is struggling in getting insurance for its own buildings. And this is a significant dilemma, since there will be no recovery without a rebuild, and there's certainly no rebuild without insurance. And as the quakes continue, communities are retreating from the city. Over 800 people left Christchurch in May this year alone. And those particular 800 have chosen Australia as their refuge. But for the most part, Christchurch residents are determined to stay and rebuild, despite the continuing quakes, the dire state of housing, and in the early days, the complete loss of basic infrastructure, such as power, waste disposal, water, etc. So 2 major cities, 2 quite different upheavals, one man-made, the other natural. And the question I pose is, how have their city leaders and central government responded, and what might the legacy be for those who call Auckland and Christchurch home? Let's make the journey back to Auckland, which for the past year has been governed by just 1 council, 1 mayor, 20 councillors, 21 local community boards, like the All Blacks in the upcoming final of the Rugby World Cup. The Auckland Council governs in a culture of high expectations from its community. The new government's arrangements were not voluntary, and the community has a watching brief on the outcome of the transition to a new super city. Will it save ratepayers' money? Will it align planning and resources? Will its size allow it to achieve on the world stage and be a truly world-class city? In a bid to ensure that the new council meets these expectations, it set about the task of preparing and adopting a spatial plan. And that plan has to have community, private sector and central government support. And in particular, the financial support of central government and the private sector will be critical to the implementation of the plan. Since its investiture in November 2010, so almost 1 year on, the Auckland Council has moved quickly to develop and launch what will become its foundation document, Auckland Unleashed. The document was subsequently titled the Auckland Plan. It's been informed by best practice from such international gurus as Greg Clark. It's the first plan of its type in New Zealand, where all other statutory plans must have particular regard to the spatial plan and spatial imperatives for all of Auckland. In short, it's got a reasonable chance of avoiding the fate of its predecessors. So what does the future of Auckland potentially look like? So following informal and then formal consultation periods, it's anticipated that this plan will be endorsed by Council in February 2012. Then we'll need to go to central government to get its buy-in. As yet, there's been no indication from the Council as to what the budget required to implement the plan might be and how it may be funded, and nor has Council released how the Auckland plan might translate into a unitary plan governing land use. The Council has, however, indicated that it will explore and adopt new tools and methods for funding the plan, i.e. private-public partnerships, and being inventive in the way it leverages off its assets base. Complete with success measures, the Auckland plan is an experiment for New Zealand, but it is an experiment that central government has indicated it will use as a model for the rest of New Zealand if it proves to be successful. As I mentioned earlier, Auckland has a long history of strategic planning. It does it very well. Its challenge has always been to fund and align that planning in its governance framework. The new governance arrangements offer Auckland the opportunity to meet those challenges and create the best of times for its communities and New Zealand incorporated. So back to Christchurch, the worst of times. Let's see how its leadership is responding to recent disaster in respect of planning. Like Auckland, the future of Christchurch is critical to the economic prosperity of New Zealand, and like Auckland, Christchurch is the subject of much central government focus. Indeed, central government created CERA, that's C-E-R-A, the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority, to support and guide the local recovery and rebuild efforts in accord with a new act, the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Act. With an estimated total recovery cost of $20 billion, Christchurch, like Auckland, will require central government funding and private sector investment to fulfil its recovery plans and aspirations. Unlike Auckland, Christchurch is responding to a natural disaster, and that lends an urgency and a focus to all that its leaders do. Under CERA, the Christchurch City Council was given the responsibility for developing the recovery plan, known as the Central City Plan, for the CBD alone. CERA will take care of the surrounds. Informed by international recovery experts from the UK, Canada, US, Australia, and New Zealand, the Central City Plan proposed budget and measures were released for comment in 2 volumes in August 2011. The first volume outlines the proposed projects, budgets and measures, whilst the second volume identifies the proposed regulations that will give effect to the plan. It's a different approach from Auckland, driven by urgency. Guided by 5 principles rather than a vision, the Central City Plan aspires to the following: to foster business investment, to respect the past, to have a long-term view of the future, to have a city that is easy to get around, and to have a vibrant central city living. The 132-page plan is aligned with previous strategic planning undertaken in the city and includes the staging of some iconic projects: a $410 million light rail system, a $200 million convention centre, a $280 million metropolitan sports facility, and a $115 million central library. Despite all, perhaps because of the urgency, Christchurch City Council, CCC, has used some innovative techniques in engaging with its communities to develop the plan. These include a 48-hour design challenge, a Share an Idea community expo, public workshops, forums, etc., Facebook, Twitter. Over 450 organisations and individuals have been heard in submissions on the plan, and it's expected that both documents, Volume 1 and 2, will be completed and endorsed by CERA and Central Government prior to 2012. The road ahead for Christchurch is long and difficult, with other key strategies yet to be developed. So I'm talking about a transport strategy, waterfront strategy. Central government, like central government here, has indicated that you can't just put your hand out and expect. We want to see the planning behind it. We want to see the success measures that accompany it. Recent submissions to the council suggest that the development community has still to be convinced that the Central City Plan strikes the right balance between social and economic well-being. And yet the leadership of Christchurch is aware of the opportunity they've been given. This from the Mayor of Christchurch, Bob Parker. Out of adversity comes an unprecedented opportunity. We are embarking together on one of the most exciting projects ever presented to a community in New Zealand, perhaps the world. Personally, I hope in 10 years to be able to look back on this time and say that collectively the government, private sector and community leaders have seized that opportunity and made Christchurch the city of the future. This then has been the tale of two cities in New Zealand. Both cities are undergoing significant change as a result of massive upheaval, one man-made, one natural. Both cities are the focus of central government, especially in the case of Christchurch through Sarah. Both are vying for central government funds and support. Both, in my view, are at a tipping point in their history. Both are endeavouring to take best practice from around the world. And both are engaging with their communities, albeit in different ways. They're both, as you can see, operating to extraordinarily tight timeframes, and both are doing that within the context of a global financial crisis. And both are taking quite different approaches and using quite different planning instruments to achieve their goals. And I guess the leaders of both cities and New Zealand hope that it is indeed a far, far better thing that they do than they've ever done before. Charles Dickens again. Only time will truly tell what their respective legacies will be for those cities and for New Zealand more broadly. Certainly one of the legacies will be a change to the way we in New Zealand plan. I am optimistic. New Zealand has a history of achievement despite its size. To name but a few, Ernest Rutherford, Edmund Hillary, jet ski inventor Hamilton, and dare I say it, the All Blacks. As an English Australian, I can say with complete impartiality that New Zealanders are an inventive, resilient and very innovative people. And I'm convinced that it is that spirit that will see them through the current ordeals to a new and much brighter era for New Zealand cities and communities. Thank you.